Alright guys, HyDra again today. Hope you're doing well and enjoying your day so far. Only the first weekend of 5 weekends of qualifiers upcoming, but big questions raised on whether some of these teams already need to make roster moves. A fair few teams made roster moves going into the Major 3 qualifiers. Some teams most certainly did not, although they may, based on their play this weekend, need changes ASAP if they actually want to be a serious contender or even qualify for the World Championship at the end of the year based on the current standings. Very much enjoyed your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always, I would greatly appreciate it. Plenty to get into. Firstly, as JurNii says, the 5 weeks of qualifiers, it might well need to be made illegal, right? Because it used to be 3 weeks of qualifiers, then the major, and there would be 5 qualifier games over those 3 weekends. Nowadays, though, we have 7 qualifier games over 5 weekends. I honestly think if you're doing 7 online games, you might as well push it to 11 and just have them do like a single round robin every time. It is a frustrating format. Honestly, it did, when I was looking up the whole peak player performance discussion the other day, looking at the fact that Scump and the OpTic team played 14 events back in Advanced Warfare. Like, nah, that was the time. And it wasn't just 14 events, but every weekends there were 2Ks or there were 5Ks. This is how I think the CDL should be done going forwards. Instead of these online qualifiers, every weekend there should be an online tournament. There should be, well, ideally 6, 7, 8 LAN events in a season, but let's just say 6 as a number that's like semi-respectable, that, you know, the events happen every, 5 weeks, every 5, 6 weeks, something like that. As I say, ideally I'd have more, but you can't maybe wish for the world with the CDL right now. But instead of doing online qualifiers, what I would much prefer to see is go back to doing, online tourneys, 2Ks, 5Ks, where there's some prize money on the line, but it's actually a tournament. Like, you get to see teams win week in, week out. This is what happened, let's say, back in Infinite Warfare, when going into the first event at the start of the season, people had just started to think, okay, or maybe it was more like the second or third event, Dallas and Atlanta, certainly Atlanta, going into that event, it wasn't online qualifiers to see those games. The seeding was done based on other factors, and, MLG would run the 2Ks and the 5Ks, and you'd have teams like eUnited playing in the 2Ks, and it was just really interesting to see how eUnited, for example, when it was gunless and he came onto that team and nobody had heard of this guy and he was slamming OpTic sometimes online, people were like, damn, who's this guy? Like, there's no way they're going to be able to replicate that on LAN. They went to LAN, they did the same thing. So that was a great storyline, and I think generally people just prefer watching something where there's a winner than what feel like irrelevant qualifier games that are basically group play, because this is the thing that you've got to understand, is that the qualifiers that we have today are effectively replacing what the group stage used to be at the event. They used to do an event for 3 days and they would effectively do the qualifiers in a day and a half before they then ran the bracket, and instead of doing those qualifiers all online, you would then do weekend tournaments. But I know from the CDL side, they want to maximize viewership, like average viewer numbers or whatever over the course of the season, therefore they want to drag it out with all these qualifiers, but I just don't think that for the majority of these games it's anywhere near interesting enough to be valid. And also, if you are a team looking to potentially make a roster change, you might play 1 or 2 teams a weekend, and they might not be good teams, or they might be very good teams, so you don't really know where you stand. Whereas if you play an online tournament, at least then you know where you are in the pecking order with respect to other teams, and therefore you can make an easier mind up as to whether you're going to make a change or not. Now, before we get into the whole Carolina stuff, did want to share this clip here because Hex talked about this on the eavesdrop with Pred the other day on the whole Dashy nearly joining the Chicago Huntsmen thing. If you guys are unaware of this story, way back going into 2020, back in 2019, Dashy, of course, was on OpTic Gaming, and there were big rumours as to whether Hex, after the whole OpTic Immortals Infinite drama, was actually going to get a spot at all. Eventually he did with NRG. They came in as OpTic Chicago. Well, that was the next year. It was Chicago Huntsmen for the first year with the OpTic Browns on OGLA, and Dashy was, I don't know, maybe convinced by TJ or whatever that Hex wasn't going to get a spot, and therefore it was time to sign the contract with OpTic Gaming Los Angeles and Immortals as it was at the time. Clearly, that was a mistake in hindsight.
The worst time was when fucking Dashy chose to go to Los Angeles OpTic instead of going to the fucking Huntsman. I have a bone to pick with that motherfucker. Still to this day, I could not believe it. I could not believe my eyes, dude. I'm like, we have. It was all like it was ready for him. Everything was good. He was gonna be on the Huntsman and all this stuff, and then I guess TJ like sort of convinced them, and then the other team was sort of telling him, was like, no, Hex is not getting a team. Hex is not gonna get a team. He's just like, it's impossible to get a team. He's not gonna get a team. He's not gonna get a team. And then I was on the phone with him. I remember I was in my theater room. I'm like, Brandon, you're making a mistake. You do not, because I obviously know what's happening right between us and them. Well, me and them, not us, me and them. Reconsider. Call this mom, and I'm like, hey, your son's about to make a mistake, Diane. And she's like, I know, sweetie. I want him to go to with you, and you're always gonna take care of him. I know that, and blah blah. And I'm like, you gotta talk to him. You gotta tell him that this, and we were gonna pay him the same amount, right? And he's like, but me and my business partner at the time, Andy Miller, hadn't signed the documents, but I knew that he had a spot, and I knew that he really wanted to partner with me, so I knew that I had my options. My plans across to him without telling him, because if you're telling me you're leaving me, I cannot tell you nothing. Exactly. You're no longer an OpTic, or in this squad. I can't trust you. And not that I don't trust him. Like Brandon to me is like my little brother. Love that dude to death.
So I guess a question for you guys: what would the roster have been had Dashy actually joined? Because clearly they wanted him. He wanted to go. If you guys remember the story, kind of famously, like as soon as Dashy found out that actually Scump and those guys weren't going to be on OpTic, they were going to be on Huntsmen, and OpTic was going to be separating effectively. Then Dashy was like, oh my god, what have I done? Like, get me out of it type thing. And he was trying to get on the phone. He was trying to like negotiate a buyout or whatever so he could leave OGLA. That never happened. And of course, his stint in OGLA wasn't especially impressive. And I always kind of remember, like, I don't know, the cropping of this image isn't great, but the original of this is pretty funny because you can just tell that Dashy is not having a good time here, standing next to these boys. A team that probably should have been better than it was, to be fair, looking back at it in hindsight. But had Dashy have joined the Chicago boys, what would they have done instead? Because Scump was going to be there, Formal was going to be there, I imagine that Envoy was going to be there as well, but it was 5v5 back then. So the team they eventually formed, of course, was with General on the left-hand side and Embos as the substitutes, and then Gunless and Nasties to round out the team. So I'm pretty sure it would have been Scump, Formal, Envoy, and of course the next year they had Scump, Formal, Envoy, Dashy. That was their OpTic Chicago team for the year after. So presumably Dashy would have been in for one of Gunless or Arcities. I guess wonder which one they would have decided to get rid of. But speaking of roster changes, we've got to talk Ravens, because sure, they may not have fully moved into their facility yet. Clay, I think, has played better over the last few weeks than he did at the start of the season, and he fried yesterday, but they still lost, and that is the key point. They're not looking that pretty either in the championship standings. So I wanted to show a couple of clips here. Scump and Zinni giving their thoughts that as far as they're concerned, Ravens need some sort of a roster change. I think anytime you lose to Surge, especially when you outslay Surge heavily and you lose to them, maybe this new Surge team are actually better. But I just can't see a world in which this new Surge team are really considerably better with that one-man move. I just can't see a world in which they're going to be serious contenders, Surge, going forwards. So losing to them in this way, in basically any fashion, is, to me, pretty problematic. And Scump and Methods think, they've got to make a move, as do the guys on the flank.
But I think Carolina did roster change.
Okay, yeah, straight up off the rip, I agree with you. I think Carolina has been struggling too much at this point to not be considering looking at potentially making a roster
If you're
change.
outslaying by 40 and you can't win the series versus Seattle.
Was it 40? Scroll down, Riley.
It was 40. Granted, I know the map 3 control skews things, but I think it's time for a Carolina roster change.
So they want what?
Just to keep it as blunt as I possibly can. If this team wants to make strides and make champs and actually try and at least be that 5th or 6th best team, right now I don't think it's coming.
I don't think that the Seattle team is worse than Carolina. I think later down the stage, I still think I'm more confident in Carolina to win. But I actually had Seattle winning the series only because of the searches. I thought both of these teams were not good enough to win in a non-extended series, so I was expecting Game 4, Game 5 here. And to Ben's point, when he spoke, I think Seattle's just better than Carolina at S&D. And with the addition of 04, who's just a search kid through and through. So the Game 5 Seattle win really wasn't that much of a surprise, but both these teams are fucking horrible, bro. I'm gonna be honest. These guys, like, Carolina's still in need of a roster change. They're still not. They're losing to Seattle online, regardless. Like,
I'm surprised they didn't change. To be honest with you, Sam.
I'm going.
They doubled down.
Yeah,
they doubled
down.
down.
They're moving in together.
Yeah,
I'm not converting it like a.
Look what Gwen's doing to these guys at the end of this offense. Look what he's doing. All they have to do is kill Gwen, and Seattle probably win this round. and they can't fucking kill him, bro. They just can't kill that guy. Which, by the way, Gwyn has been really good for Carolina. I know they lost today, but it's clear that he's the best player in this team. Gwyn is insane.
Yeah.
And then that's pretty much all she wrote for Control.
Fucking Clay, dude.
It's also as long as the list goes for good players on their team.
Yeah.
Oh, that's not right.
It was a good play. Damn, Pat, come on, Slade. It's not
That's
right,
disrespectful.
Slade.
I
That's
think-
disrespectful. They got good players, Pat. They got DJ.
No, they got
Nah,
Gwyn.
Clay-
and they
Clay-
got
Clay's
two
got-
average guys.
Clay's
and then they
actually
got
played. Clay's
an
actually
ass
played
guy.
so much better since stage 1 on this team. Like in terms of his own individual performances, they just can't win online because Fellow is getting fucking turned on, and then they go to land. They play well.
Well, hold on. Clay was also super inconsistent in stage 2 online.
That's fucked, Chris.
Both the errors. I don't
Yeah,
wanna
with no
call on
shit,
Fellow
no
or definitely
shit. But
Sub
he's
up.
played better than he did stage 1, like overall.
So I guess the question is, what is the move to be made? If they had Real still, if that was ever a thing, that could have been something really to think about, right? Because he joined Heretics this week, played a really good opening series of the weekends, and of course they got the victory against Boston in the Game 5 with another Real masterclass, to be honest. He could have been on Ravens still, they couldn't get the visa sorted, that's unlucky. But if you were to make a change now with Ravens, there's a couple of angles that you can have a look at. Mainly, it's got to be on the AR side. Like I've said it before, that on LAN, Clay and Felony are not the weakest AR duo in the league. But online, they pretty much are. And I still think that's probably true. Clay has played better, and I definitely wouldn't get rid of Clay. I feel like he does have still the passion, the fire, the energy, and especially when you get to LAN. But the issue that I have is like over these weeks of online qualifiers, whether that starts to take a toll. And in terms of championship standings, Ravens, they're in an okay spot, but they're not in a great spot. And as I said, I was kind of hoping that they would end up turning up to their home event in Charlotte and they would have some home crowd support and people would be really rooting for Clay to make it to the World Championship and they would get the job done. But that ain't happening anymore, right? There's no Charlotte event. They're going to do it with no fans in Burbank, California. So I think that's a bit of a loss. To me, you've got to look at the AR duo, right? And I did say this with the team before. As soon as they signed Fellow, like, look, Godorex was gone. Understandably so. Fellow comes in, TJ comes in, they look better initially, but they don't get the placement they wanted at the first event. They got a better placement, for sure, the most recent event with their top 6, but they go back to online, and it's like, look, you got some decent points on LAN for getting top 6 at Major 2, but you go to online, you play a Surge team that you've got to beat and you lose, you give them 10 points. That's not great, and now they're behind Surge in the standings when I think they could have been ahead of them. So Gwyn and TJ I think is fine. There's an argument that you could potentially find someone better for TJ, but really it's just their search and destroy. Like, we know that Surge are good at search, but you cannot lose 2 searches in that way to Seattle if you want to be a serious team. Like, if you want to be a roster that can mix it up and get upset victories, you've got to do it a lot of the times in the Game 5, and their search has just been woeful, right? I mean, ever since really this team formed, it's been bad, and it's honestly not massively improved the entire time. So I would say you've got to think about that. Tej is a good search and destroy player, but that's when it comes down to which AR you were to bring in if you were to replace one of them. There's even an argument to say, do you get rid of both Clay and Fellow and bring in like Slasher +1? And would that improve their team? Possibly it would. Will they do it? I don't think so. Like, I don't really see a world in which Clay goes, especially when Brian Saint is the coach. The issue, I guess, is on that side is that Clay, Fellow, Brian Saint, they're all boys, you know, they all get along well. Will they want to make a change there? Possibly not. But is it still a wise idea? Possibly yes. We've talked about the Illy thing. Illy did say the other day that he doesn't think he's going to be back this season for whatever reason that is the case for. So, yeah, I guess we'll have to just stay tuned on this. But Illy would make a lot of sense to me. There are probably other AR options out there, but they're relatively few and far between. And then you've also got to consider what the timing is on the season. To be fair, after Major 3 now in Toronto, there is a week off. There is that time to make changes, but we have seen teams, even Ravens themselves, make moves before Majors. And if this kind of, if that performance yesterday continues, I think they're better than they showed. But I don't know if they're much better than they showed, and I wouldn't be massively surprised if they consider after the next couple of games that, yeah, they might want to make a move mid-stage, because these are the standings. They're on 75. If they'd have got to 85, they'd have been sitting pretty in a good position. They'd have been in the 8th spot. You know, Rocker, maybe they're not great still. I don't think they are. Gorillas are not great either, that somehow have points after getting back-to-back top 6s. But Surge are now at 80 points. Miami are at 80. Ravens are at 75. Thieves, they looked really good yesterday. You know, I think they're going to make the World Championship, Thieves. They're at 70. They're not far at all behind the top 8 spots that qualify for champs. And then Boston, you know, they're still at 50, but they've potentially got some room for upgrades as well. So I look at these teams. If I'm Ravens, I'm thinking, damn, I've got to be better than Gorillas. I've got to be better than Surge. Got to be better than Miami. And then probably hope that Boston just don't make the comeback that they think that they might. So that loss against Surge, I think, is potentially very telling in the course of the season. But very much enjoyed your thoughts on all this stuff in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care. And I'll see you next time.